In 1991, 4 young girls were killed in a yogurt shop after hours in Austin, Texas, a case marked by false confessions, legal twists, and a community searching for truth. The yogurt shop sat quietly at the edge of the strip mall. Its sign glowed in soft pink and blue against the Texas night. A gentle electric hum filled the warm air. The parking lot was mostly empty now, the way it usually was after 9 in the evening. Inside, a few chairs were already turned upside down on tables. The floor had been mopped. The music had been turned off, leaving only the low buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. It was the end of a normal Sunday. 4 girls were still inside. They were not in a hurry. They had closed the shop many times before. The front door was locked. The closed sign turned outward. The lights dimmed but not fully off. Nothing about the night felt dangerous. Nothing felt unusual. Outside, cars passed on the road, tires humming softly against asphalt. Somewhere in the distance, someone laughed. A radio played faintly from another store still open down the strip. The world kept moving. Inside the yogurt shop, the girls talked quietly while finishing their closing routine. They were tired, but relaxed. They trusted the place. They trusted the night. They trusted that this was just another ordinary evening. The shop was called I Can't Believe It's Yogurt, a place filled with color during the day, children pressing their faces to the glass, teenagers laughing in booths, the smell of sugar and waffle cones floating into the parking lot. But at night, it felt different, quieter, still. The bright colors looked softer in dim light. The tiled floor reflected pale shapes from overhead lamps. The counter, once busy with customers, now stood empty and clean. That Sunday, December 6th, 1991, had been slow, cold by Texas standards. The girls working that night were familiar faces behind the counter. They knew how to close the registers. They knew where the cleaning supplies were kept. They knew how long everything took. They had done this before. As the night deepened, the strip mall grew quieter. One by one, lights from nearby stores turned off. Metal security gates slid into place. The parking lot emptied until only a few cars remained under tall yellow lamps. Inside the yogurt shop, the girls finished counting the cash drawer. Someone joked about homework. Someone else mentioned being cold. They laughed softly. They didn't know the routine was about to break. They didn't know the night was no longer ordinary. No one knows exactly when the first moment changed. There was no scream reported, no sudden noise, no disturbance loud enough to be remembered. At some point, someone entered the shop, or more than one person. At some point, control shifted. The calm inside the shop disappeared quietly, without alerting the outside world. Whatever happened next unfolded behind locked doors, under dim lights, while the rest of the strip mall slept. Hours later, long after midnight, a patrol officer drove past the shopping center. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Then he noticed smoke, thin gray smoke curling upward into the night air. Not heavy, not fast, just enough to be noticed. He slowed his car, turned toward the yogurt shop. The lights inside were off now, but smoke leaked from the doorway. He stopped, got out, approached carefully. The smell reached him before the door did. Burned plastic, burned sugar, something darker underneath. He called for backup. When firefighters arrived, they forced the door open. Smoke rolled out slowly, like a tired breath leaving a room. The fire inside was small, contained. It had not spread far. It almost seemed intentional in its restraint. As the smoke cleared, the scene revealed itself slowly, too slowly. The shop no longer felt like a place for laughter or sweetness. It felt heavy, still, wrong. In the back of the shop, near the restroom area, the bodies were found. 4 teenage girls. They had been attacked. They had been killed. The fire had been set afterward, not to destroy the building, not to consume everything, just enough to hide something, just enough to delay discovery. By morning, the strip mall was surrounded by police tape. News vans arrived. Neighbors gathered in silence. Parents held their children closer than usual. The yogurt shop sign still glowed faintly above the chaos. Bright colors over a dark truth. Detectives moved carefully through the burned interior, every surface examined, every object photographed. The fire had damaged evidence, but not erased it. The registers were open. Money was missing, but robbery did not fully explain what had happened. Something about the scene felt more complicated, more deliberate, more personal. Austin was shaken. Parents questioned routines. Businesses changed closing procedures. Fear settled into places that had once felt safe. The yogurt shop was no longer just a store. It became a memory frozen in time. Investigators asked the same questions again and again. Who knew the girls were closing that night? Who had been in the area? Who might have noticed something unusual? The answers were vague, unhelpful. Memory fades quickly when fear takes its place. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The case remained open, unresolved. The building was cleaned, repaired, eventually repurposed. But for the families, time did not move forward. It stretched, heavy, uncertain, waiting for answers that did not come. Morning arrived slowly over the strip mall. A pale winter light spread across the parking lot, revealing police cars, yellow tape, and the quiet posture of people standing at a distance, unsure what to say to one another. Inside the shop, investigators worked in careful silence. They photographed everything. They measured distances. They marked positions on the tiled floor with small numbered cards. Soot clung to the walls in uneven shadows. The air still carried the faint smell of smoke and melted plastic. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was assumed. Every surface was treated like it might be holding a quiet answer. The cash registers were examined first. Drawers open. Bills disturbed. Coins scattered in ways that did not feel accidental. Robbery had happened, but robbery did not feel like the whole story. There were signs of control, of time spent inside, of actions taken without hurry. The fire had been set in a way that suggested intention, but not panic. It was small, contained, almost careful. Investigators moved toward the back of the shop. The hallway near the restrooms felt narrow, heavy with still air. This was where the girls had been found. The position of the scene suggested that they had been moved, that events had unfolded over minutes, not seconds, that whoever had been inside the shop had not been afraid of being discovered quickly. Outside, cars continued to pass on the road, morning commuters heading to work, unaware of the quiet tragedy only yards away. Detectives began building a timeline. Who had seen the girls last? What time had the shop officially closed? Which nearby stores had remained open late enough to notice anything unusual? They walked door to door across the strip mall. Most shop owners had left by 9. A few remembered seeing the yogurt shop lights still on around closing time. No one remembered hearing anything strange. No one remembered seeing anyone run. The parents arrived in waves of disbelief. Some had already heard from the news. Others were called directly by officers who spoke in low, careful voices. The shock did not come loudly. It came like a weight, slow, crushing, hard to understand. The girls had gone to work. They had done this before. They were supposed to come home. As the hours passed, the names of the 4 girls began to circulate through Austin, whispered at kitchen tables, spoken through tears on phone calls, written carefully in notebooks by reporters standing outside the taped perimeter. They were daughters, sisters, friends, students. They had favorite songs, favorite snacks, inside jokes, plans for the next week. All of it now paused in a single night. Tips began to come in, phone calls from people who thought they might have seen something. A car driving too slowly through the lot. A person standing near the payphone earlier that evening. A memory of someone entering the shop close to closing time. Each tip was logged, written down, followed gently. Most of them dissolved into nothing. Memory is fragile when fear and hindsight begin to reshape it. Investigators studied the layout of the shop, the front counter, the hallway, the restrooms, the back storage area. They tried to understand how events might have unfolded without being noticed. How control had been established so quietly, how time had stretched inside the building while the outside world remained unaware. The fire became a central focus. Why set it at all? It had not destroyed much. It had not consumed the building. It had only damaged parts of the scene. Just enough to interfere. just enough to blur details, but not enough to erase everything. It suggested thought, not chaos. In the days that followed, Austin changed in small ways. Parents drove their children to work instead of letting them walk. Store owners installed brighter lights in parking lots. Closing procedures were rewritten. Locks were checked twice. The feeling of safety had shifted, slightly but permanently. Sketch artists worked with vague descriptions from distant witnesses, faces that might have been seen, cars that might have been parked nearby. Nothing certain, nothing solid. The case felt like a puzzle missing too many pieces. Weeks passed, then months. The yogurt shop reopened briefly after repairs, but customers never returned the same way. The bright colors now carried a shadow. Eventually, the business closed. The space was leased to someone else. The sign came down, but the memory remained in the walls. Detectives revisited the evidence again and again. Photographs, notes, forensic reports. They tried to see something they had missed, something small hiding between details. They knew the answers were somewhere in the quiet spaces of that night. They just could not find them. Rumors moved through the city like low wind. Speculation about who could have done it. Speculation about why. Most of it unhelpful. Some of it painful for the families to hear. Because guessing does not heal. And guessing does not solve. Years went by. The case never closed. Boxes of files remained on shelves in the police department, carefully labeled, frequently reopened. The names of the girls never removed from the board, never forgotten, just waiting. Then, years later, something shifted. New statements, new attention, new suspects, young men brought in for questioning, long interviews, confessions that seemed to bring relief at first, a sense that, finally, the silence might break. But as details were examined, doubts appeared. Confessions did not match evidence. Timelines did not fit. Memories seemed shaped by questioning, not by truth. What had felt like progress began to feel uncertain again. The legal process unfolded slowly. Arrests, charges, courtrooms filled with quiet tension, families hoping this was the end of waiting. But the story did not settle. It twisted, turned, raised more questions than answers. The case became two stories at once, one about what happened inside the yogurt shop, and one about whether the right people had been blamed for it, both heavy, both unresolved. Through it all, the memory of the girls remained steady. Photographs on mantels, yearbook pictures, candles lit each December, a quiet ritual of remembrance. The strip mall aged, paint faded, stores changed names, but people who lived in Austin still remembered. They still slowed their car slightly when passing that corner. They still felt the weight of that night. The files remained open, the questions remained, and the quiet continued. Years after the night of the fire, the case found new movement. Detectives, still carrying the weight of unanswered questions, returned to old evidence with fresh eyes. Boxes were reopened. Photographs were laid out again under bright desk lamps. Notes from the early days of the investigation were read slowly, line by line, as if the truth might be hiding between sentences. Time had passed, but the case had never truly rested. New names entered the conversation. Young men, now older, brought in for questioning. Long interviews followed, rooms with plain walls, tables with nothing on them except a recorder and a stack of paper, voices speaking quietly for hours, memories pulled forward from years before. At first, there was a sense of relief, a feeling that the silence might finally break, that the long waiting might be nearing its end. Statements were given, confessions followed, details were shared that sounded convincing in the moment, enough to move the case forward, enough for arrests to be made. Families heard the news with cautious hope. They had lived with uncertainty for so long that any sign of progress felt like a small light in a very long night. But as investigators compared the confessions to the physical evidence from the scene, things began to feel uneven. Some details matched, others did not. Timelines did not always fit the known facts. Descriptions of the shop did not always align with photographs taken that morning. The more the statements were studied, the more questions appeared. The case moved into courtrooms, wooden benches, high ceilings, soft echoes of footsteps. Reporters filled the back rows with notebooks and cameras. Families sat near the front, hands folded, listening carefully to every word. The men accused sat quietly, facing forward. The room felt heavy with expectation. Prosecutors presented the confessions. They described how the suspects had spoken about the night, how they had admitted involvement, how they had provided pieces of the story that seemed to fit. Defense attorneys stood and pointed to the gaps. They spoke about inconsistencies, about the possibility of false memory, about the way long interrogations can shape what a person believes they remember. Experts were called to speak, forensic specialists, psychologists, investigators, each offering careful opinions about what the evidence could mean. Nothing was shouted, nothing was certain. The trial unfolded slowly, like a careful conversation where no one wanted to move too quickly. For the families, it was difficult. They wanted resolution, they wanted clarity, they wanted to believe that the people responsible were finally being held accountable. But they also wanted truth. And truth, in this case, did not feel simple. Convictions came, then appeals, then reversals. Legal documents moved back and forth through the system like slow tides, each decision reopening old emotions, each hearing bringing the case back into the light. The story of the yogurt shop was no longer only about what happened that night. It was also about whether justice was being done correctly. Years continued to pass. The men once convicted were released as doubts grew stronger. Evidence that had seemed solid began to feel fragile under closer examination. Questions about how the confessions had been obtained became central. The case returned to uncertainty, returned to silence, returned to waiting. Detectives who had worked the original scene were older now. Some retired. Some still watched from a distance as new investigators stepped in. The files were handed from one set of hands to another, carefully, respectfully, like something fragile that must not be dropped. The city of Austin had grown. New buildings, new neighborhoods, new generations who had not been alive in 1991, but the story of the yogurt shop remained in local memory. It was told quietly, passed from person to person, a reminder that some questions do not fade with time. Each December, candles were lit, not for the court cases, not for the suspects, but for the 4 girls, for who they were, for the lives they had lived before that night, for the futures they never reached. Investigators continued to revisit the evidence using newer methods. Advances in forensic science offered small possibilities. Old samples were re-examined. Old photographs scanned into digital systems. Every small development was treated with careful hope, but the answers still stayed just out of reach. The courtroom drama had come and gone. The headlines had faded, but the core of the case remained unchanged. 4 girls had gone to work and never returned home. That truth did not move, did not change, did not soften. The strip mall still stood. Cars still pulled into the lot each evening. Lights still turned off one by one at closing time. And sometimes someone passing by would remember, would feel a quiet weight in their chest, would think about how ordinary that night must have felt. Right up until it wasn't. The case remained open, not forgotten, not solved, just waiting. Time moved forward the way it always does. Quietly, without asking permission, without waiting for anyone to be ready. The city grew around the memory of that night, building new streets, new stores, new routines. But for the families, time did not feel like movement. It felt like distance stretching between what was and what could have been. Bedrooms remained the same for years, posters on walls, trophies on shelves, clothes folded in drawers that no one had the heart to empty. A kind of stillness settled into those rooms, as if they were waiting for footsteps that would never come back down the hallway. Each December, the air felt heavier, not because of the weather, but because of memory. Candles were lit in quiet spaces, sometimes at home, sometimes at small gatherings where friends and relatives sat together without needing to say much. They remembered birthdays, favorite songs, little habits. The way laughter used to sound in the house before that night divided life into before and after. Austin changed, but certain places remained tied to the past. People who had lived in the city in 1991 could still point to the exact corner of the strip mall without needing to think. They remembered where they were when they heard the news. They remembered how the story spread from phone call to phone call before the internet carried everything instantly. They remembered the feeling of disbelief that lingered for weeks. The building that once held the yogurt shop no longer looked the same. New paint, different windows, a different business inside. But sometimes, late at night, when the parking lot was nearly empty and the lights hummed softly overhead, it felt easy to imagine the past still sitting there quietly beneath the surface, like a memory that never fully leaves a place. For the families, the legal twists had been exhausting. Hope rising, then falling, answers appearing, then dissolving again. They learned to live with uncertainty the way people learn to live with chronic pain, not by accepting it, but by carrying it, carefully, every day. They spoke about their daughters when they could, not about the crime, but about who they were, their kindness, their humor, their plans. They wanted the world to remember them as people, not just victims in a headline. Because before that night, they had been full, living stories. Friends who had worked at the shop in other shifts remembered the ordinary details, the way the machines hummed, the way the spoons clinked in metal containers, the way the girls would lean on the counter and talk during slow hours. These memories were soft, gentle, almost comforting in their normality. They reminded everyone how simple the evening had been before it changed. Detectives, even years later, sometimes thought about the case late at night, the way certain scenes stay in the mind long after the files are closed for the day. They remembered the smell of smoke, the way the shop looked under flashlight beams in the early morning hours. They wondered if there had been something small they had missed, some detail hiding quietly in plain sight. New investigators reviewed the case with fresh perspective. They did not carry the same memories from the original scene, but they carried respect for it. They knew the weight of what they were holding. They knew families were still waiting. So they worked slowly, carefully, patiently. Advances in technology brought small possibilities. Evidence stored for decades was tested again using methods that did not exist in 1991. Each test result was met with quiet hope and often quiet disappointment. The answers still did not come clearly into view. The story of the yogurt shop became something taught quietly in conversations about safety, about investigation, about how fragile certainty can be. It became part of the city's memory, a story told not loudly, but thoughtfully, with care, with respect, and through all of it, one truth never changed. 4 girls had gone to work, and they had not come home. That fact sat at the center of everything, steady and unmoving. A quiet point around which all the years turned. Sometimes, people driving through that part of Austin late at night would slow down without realizing why. They would glance at the row of stores, at the empty spaces between parked cars, at the way the lights reflected on the pavement, and for a moment, they would feel something difficult to name. A heaviness, a stillness, a memory that belonged to the city itself. The case remained open, not forgotten, not abandoned, just waiting for the one piece of truth that would allow the story to rest. Night settles over Austin the same way it always has. Streetlights hum, cars pass in steady lines, storefronts close one by one, their lights clicking off into darkness. From a distance, everything looks ordinary, calm, predictable, safe. And yet, for those who remember, there is a quiet layer beneath the city that never fully sleeps. A memory that moves softly through certain streets and certain corners. A memory tied to a small yogurt shop that no longer exists. The parking lot where the shop once stood still fills and empties every day. People step in and out of new businesses. They carry shopping bags. They check their phones. They walk to their cars without thinking about the past beneath their feet. Time has covered the surface, but not erased what happened there. For the families, the years have been measured not by court dates or news stories, but by absence. Holidays with an empty chair, birthdays that arrive quietly, moments when they instinctively reach for the phone to share something and then remember there is no one on the other end. They have learned to carry memory gently, to speak their daughters' names in soft ways that keep them present. Friends who grew older, who moved away, who built new lives, still remember the girls as they were, laughing behind the counter, complaining about homework, talking about plans for the weekend. Those are the images they choose to hold on to, because those moments came before the night that changed everything. Investigators still keep the files, still return to them from time to time, still believe that somewhere, quietly waiting, is the detail that will bring clarity. The case has never been placed on a shelf to gather dust. It remains open, patient, unfinished. The story of the yogurt shop is not loud anymore. It does not dominate headlines. It does not fill television screens. Instead, it lives quietly in memory, in the way longtime residents pause when passing that part of town, in the way people lower their voices slightly when speaking about it, in the way candles are lit each December without needing an announcement. There is something about ordinary places that makes tragedies harder to understand. A yogurt shop, a strip mall, a Sunday night. Nothing about those words suggests danger. Nothing about them suggests that 4 lives would end there. And perhaps that is why the story lingers, because it reminds everyone how thin the line can be between routine and the unexpected. Late at night, when the city is calm and the traffic is light, the strip mall feels almost like it did decades ago. Soft lights reflecting on pavement, quiet storefronts resting after a long day, a gentle stillness in the air. It is easy to imagine how peaceful that night must have felt before anything changed. Easy to imagine the girls finishing their work, talking softly, unaware of what was coming. And so, the memory remains. Not sharp, not loud, but steady. A quiet presence that has never fully left, because 4 girls went to work and never came home. And the questions that followed have never completely found their answers. The night continues. The city sleeps. The lights hum softly over empty parking spaces. And somewhere in the stillness, the story rests, unfinished, remembered, carried gently by those who know it.